It is my pleasure to welcome you to Passion Pivots, where we explore the key decision-making moments our guests have as they explore their lifestyle, entrepreneurial, and adventure dreams. My name is Scott Armstrong, and I have the exciting job to be your host, conductor, and provocateur for today's journey. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsor, Adventure 50, who've been helping those 40 plus find their incredible life adventures since 2012. Well, I am absolutely thrilled today. I've got Mark Black on the line from New Brunswick, and I met Mark last December in Ottawa. Mark is an amazing example of somebody who just says obstacles, yeah, they exist, but you plow through them. At a very young age, Mark had a very serious birth defect. I believe he's a heart and double lung transplant survivor, and that is just the beginning of his story. Now Mark is actually a well-renowned professional speaker, speaking across North America on a variety of issues. Mark, I'm not going to tip any more of your hand here today, but I think from a Passion Pivots perspective, which our audience is sort of 45 plus, I couldn't wait to get you on the show. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure.
So, Mark, can you tell us, we're going to direct people to your website throughout the interview, at the end of the interview, but can you tell me, how did life start for you? It was very unusual.
Yeah, so as you said, a developmental abnormality in the heart resulted in the necessity of a valve surgery. So initial open heart surgery at 24 hours old, give or take. I was airlifted from the hospital where I was born to the closest children's hospital, which was about 3 hours away, and had an emergency surgery then, and then another surgery about 12 months, almost to the day later, to correct another issue. And so the first few years were very tense, and my parents, who I was their first child, they were 24-year-olds, newly married. They'd been married 10 months when I was born, or at least that's the story they continue to stick to. So I have, and now as a parent myself, just great respect for what that experience must have been like. Of course, I remember nothing, but what it must have been like for them to have that as their introduction to parenthood.
So tell me, you've got all these challenges, and we see in life a lot of people become their circumstance. They have challenges that come before them, and they go, I can't do this because of that. I can't do that. And somewhere, and I want you to still focus on those young, evolutionary years that you had. Why didn't you just become the poor kid, the one who had no chance? Or were you like that as a child?
Well, that's exactly why I referenced my parents so early, because Bill and Nick Black were two very wise people for their young age. And Mom would to nurses that she talked to who had been in the cardiac unit forever, and one in particular who said, the decisions you make as a parent are going to shape who this kid becomes, and if you don't want him to be a cardiac kid, was the term she used for the kid who's kind of wrapped in bubble because the parents want to protect them from the world, then you need to make conscious decisions to allow that to happen. And so they made a lot of what I would call courageous decisions in terms of the freedom that they allowed me and the activities they encouraged me to participate in. So I was a very, by all external accounts, a very normal kid, and lived a very normal childhood, and played sports, and was very active, which, to the average kid is not a big deal. But there were some risks to that for a child who had been through the hard issues that I had. And
what were some of those risks, Mark?
Let the leash off, I guess.
Mark, tell me about some of those risks that you've gone through, because I'm just thinking, as a parent, I am a parent as well. My gosh, every day is there something going to be happening here? What were some of the everyday, risks that would present themselves to you?
Sure. So everything from, from infection risks, because cardiac issues early on can leave you sort of more at risk than the average person, to the potential for a cardiac event of some kind, whether it was a heart attack or a stroke or some other issue. That there was no imminent risk, but there were higher risks certainly than the average child.
Mm.
And then, of course, just the everyday things that every parent, the falling down and banging your head and scraping your knee and all those things that some parents, are not able to allow their kid experience, it would have been very understandable, I think, for my parents to try and protect me from those things. I
Mhm.
was also, well, still am, very, very small, and as a child was much smaller than most other kids. So, playing with kids my age meant playing with kids that were significantly larger than I was. And so when you're playing contact sport, that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes too.
Tell me
And they
about
just,
bullying,
they
Mark.
allow.
Yeah, sorry. Tell me about bullying. You just mentioned those physical activities here. Was bullying a more prominent aspect of your life, or was there more empathy going towards you from your classmates at school?
I think the majority were pretty good. There were certainly incidents, and teasing, and there wasn't a lot of physical intimidation, thankfully, but there was certainly lots of the teasing, and probably would be called bullying, at least in today's culture. I think back in the day we might have just called it kids being kids, but in any case, again, I think my parents knew that allowing me to experience some of that without just throwing me to the wolves was the best way to develop the tools to deal with it. And so while they were there to support me and encourage me and guide me, they also allowed me to fall down and fail and experience difficulty and challenge.
So, what I'm hearing from you, those first couple of decades for you had every reason to turn into a turtle shell a little bit, hide, be protected by your parents, choose a rather fearful attitude for life and not embrace it. You didn't do that. Now comes along your 20s. And did you have any more, significant, physical challenges that presented or medical challenges in your 20s?
So yeah, I mean, at 23, everything sort of came to a head. I'd been slowly complications continued to sort of add on, and we just coped with them slowly but surely. Complications of the heart condition until we reached a point at 23 where we kind of hit a critical mass, and I lost about a third of my body weight in 3 months, and was increasingly short of breath all the time, and it just got to a point where I couldn't ignore the symptoms any longer. Went to see my family doctor, who had me admitted to hospital within hours. And then I was taken by ambulance to see the cardiac transplant team in Halifax, because I'm on the East Coast. And I was an inpatient for a month there while they ran tests and stabilized my condition, and then eventually said, "Look, the only way forward for you at this point is a heart lung transplant."
Hmm.
And yeah, we knew as a family, we knew that heart transplant was going to be in my future at some point, but for the longest time, it was heart only, not heart lung, which adds another layer of complication and risk, and typically a shorter life expectancy, even if things go well. So that was a blow, to put it mildly.
Yeah. How many years ago was
Um,
that, Mark?
so I was 23 when that decision was made. I'm just turned 40, so 17 years ago, 16 and
Okay.
a half. Yeah.
I'm smiling as I hear this because you're defying odds. You had this surgery that gives you a free life pass to pretty much not have to do an awful lot. You're just lucky to be here, but you just haven't sat and coasted. For life. Coming out of that surgery, tell me a little bit about your mindset. You've survived the surgery now. You're recovering. What were some of the mental processes you used going forward to figure out what you could and wanted to do?
So I think, like anybody who has experienced some version of um, facing their mortality, whether that's through a loved one's death or significant illness, or their own, or an accident, or whatever it might be, there's a new appreciation for every day and for the value of life and making the most of that time, etc. And so, the first real conscious moments after surgery, which were actually 4 or 5 days later when the medication was, the pain meds were reduced enough that I was with it,
Hmm.
um, was just that appreciation of, I wonder what's possible now that um, that I have this new lease on life, so to speak. And certainly there was a long list of potential pitfalls and obstacles and challenges that were that we're maybe going to be in the near future. But again, based on life experience, I've been taught to process those, not ignore them, but at the same time not be limited or shaped by them. And so the thought process was, how do I best use whatever time this has pursed for me, whether that's another year or another 10 years or no. And that was a long recovery.
I was going to say that's a very good point here. You're coming out of the surgery, and this hasn't given you a free pass for 4 or 5 decades more of life. You don't know how long you're going to be living. So your advice, sir, your advice to people who our audience generally is 45 up, looking at a passion pivot in life, something to go from I have to I want to, and we constantly see people underestimate, achieve because they don't value the opportunity that they haven't had the life-threatening scenario that you went through where you go, my gosh, okay, I'm not going to waste another day. We get used to wasting days, and you see this all the time. So how do you, and I know you speak professionally on this and overcoming obstacles and challenges and things like that. What would be some of your advice points for folks who are in that sort of malaise and apathy kind of state?
So one of the slogans that I live by, that I have one of those rubber band bracelets that sits on my wrist every day to remind me, is to live today. And what I mean by that is not, live every day like it's your last day, which is something that people who have faced death love to say, but it's incredibly impractical. But rather just the place, and I think it's with gratitude, it's the place of appreciation for the opportunity that is every day, and living with intentionality, right? What do you want to create? What do you want your life to look like in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And what am I going to do today that takes me one step closer to that? And when we live with a live today mindset, we live with the appreciation that every day is a choice to either move closer to or farther away from what it is we're trying to create. And so we need to, we need to know what it is we're trying to create, which a lot of people haven't thought about that question in a long time. But B, it's daily, seemingly insignificant actions that we take on a daily basis that are going to shape who we become. And so we need to be doing those things with intentionality and effort and gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to do it. So I also hear what you're saying, and I think it's so true. We tend to, as we get older, place more and more limits on what we believe we're capable of doing. And all you need to do is take a look around to witness people who are far exceeding what others might consider to be their potential, and therefore ask yourself, if they can do it, why can't I? And I think that's probably the most powerful part of what I do, is I show people a picture of me 7 days after transplant surgery, and then I show them a picture crossing the finish line of a marathon, not to say, hey, wow, look what Mark did, but rather, if he can do that, then what can I do? Because the truth is, you can do a lot more than you probably think.
Absolutely. And you just gave me a whole bunch of fish food in the pond. I have about 12 hooks I want to put in for you to answer. So I'm going to get some of them while they're still in my head here. The first one is we catch a lot of folks who are burnt out. So when you're 45, 50, you've put in 2 or 3 decades or 60, you've put in 2 or 3 decades of work. And you know what? I don't want to think about anything more. I'm spent. I'm done. And as you said so insightfully, it's been a long time since they've actually thought about what it is they would like to do. So, how do we, we're at that point where we've disengaged from our life work, whether we've enjoyed it or not, we're burnt out. How do we go from that gear transition to a place where, hey, there's a lot of other things that I could be doing? What would you, advise folks to do to take those baby steps to get on that new track that could lead to something amazing?
It's a great question. I think it's a little, probably the process is slightly different for everybody, with some tricks or tips that have worked for different people that I've worked with. Certainly, if you're able to face your mortality, and so for some people this really freaks them out and they can't do it, and for other people they find it a very useful exercise. I challenge people to write their obituary and say, okay, in other words, what do you want people to be able to say about you when your life is done? Or what do you want to be able to say of yourself? And that has a really powerful focusing element to it, where people kind of get the essential of what really matters to them.
And Mark, what would be your obituary? What would and don't need it word for word or anything, but what would be coming from your mouth with that kind of exercise?
Mark lived his life in such a way that other people's lives were better because they came in contact with him. Is the short version.
Yeah.
And we get caught, don't we, Scott, in our culture. Some people, as you said, are in that burnt out space of I'm clocking my time until retirement or until whatever. We're living that life of someday, right? When I get to this magical, mythical point in my life, whatever that is, retirement or when the kids move out or when everything is just right, then I'm going to start doing these other things that I have on the bucket list, the to-do list of life, that I'm going to get to travel, or I'm going to get to do whatever. And so the first thing I'd say to those people is, let's not take for granted that you're going to get that time. I hope you do. I hope everybody lives to be 110, but reality is that we don't know. So let's start doing some of those things. But also,
sorry, I told you you put a lot of fish hooks in the water. I'm sorry, it's your fault that I'm interrupting you. That's what I'm saying. That's my
no, not at all.
Is you mentioned that one long word, marathon. You've run marathons. How did you go from?
Yeah.
How did you train yourself to that? Because that seems like a 1,000,000-mile distance for somebody with new heart and lungs.
Yeah, and there were times when I felt like it. So that the physical part of that answer is, it took about 2.5 years of training, starting from walking on the treadmill for 5 minutes through to being able to run for hours. The mental or emotional part of that, or of the why even do it, I think is I had a mindset that if I could do that, then I would know I could handle whatever else I had to handle. Like for me, for whatever reason, probably because I had been so limited physically at the last stages of my life pre-transplant, I had gone from being an athlete to being not able to do it anymore, not able to even climb stairs without being out of breath. And so it was sort of a test, right? Like if these heart and lungs will do this, and if I can mentally force myself through the difficulty of training, then it's sort of a benchmark that I can lean on for the rest of my life, knowing I can handle whatever else is going to come my way.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, sir.
I think that's just that is a tool also that I love to suggest to people, is to look back through your life and remember the proud accomplishments. Remember the things that you are most proud of, which are almost always the things that were most difficult, which is another whole podcast. And tap into those, because you tend to be people, especially if we're achievers, especially if we're trying to, create results in our life, we're always forward thinking. And so we accomplish something and we rarely take more than a few minutes to celebrate it. And then we move on to the next thing. And it's very easy to forget where you've been, what you've already done. And when you can tap into that it's an incredible confidence booster, right? So that when you face a new challenge and you say, geez, I don't know if I can do this. Well, let's remember where you've already been and what you've already done.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, I wanted to mention, I thought of you several times this spring, because I knew you ran marathons when I met you last December. You told me that. I thought that was amazing. And actually tomorrow I'm doing my 9th Tough Mudder British Commando obstacle course race. And,
wow.
Nothing like you. It's like, really, but I have arthritis in both my knees, and I was set to give up because I can't run anymore. And I said, okay, Mark, I talked to Mark. You're going to give up that easy, Scott? So I just wanted to let you know that even just by, coming across each other in Ottawa, I think I was in February and I was hitting the treadmill and I'm going, why am I bothered doing this? I have no chance to do the Mudder this year. And you came into my mind, and I just kept on going. And I wanted to let you know that meant a whole bunch to me. your point about people not giving themselves enough credit for what they've done already. One of the things that we like to do for folks when they're thinking about their vision for their future is to go back through their lives to do an inventory of the great accomplishments that they have had already, because we don't give them enough credit to do that. When you see people do that, what changes in their disposition when they sort of go, yeah, I did that before? What kind of metamorphosis do you see in sort of their confidence levels?
You just see, yeah, as you said, as you alluded to, they physically change, right? That they sit up a little taller, the head lifts up a little bit. Maybe I'm not as incompetent or washed up or drained or whatever it is that they're feeling, whatever the limiting belief is in their head at that moment, and they go, right, I did that, so maybe I can do this, right? And I think it's probably just human nature, because I think we all kind of have a little bit of that in us. But man, there isn't a person walking around that hasn't been through something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy for people, I think, to I struggle with this when I coach people, and even in people that are in my audiences when I speak. We play the comparison game, right? And so people will say, well, in fact, you did it earlier. You said, well, nothing compared to the marathon, but I did. It's all about our own personal frame of reference, right? So I've been through what I've been through, but that means that I can do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've never had to go through my parents getting divorced. I have no idea what that would be like, and I would think that would be incredibly difficult. And someone else might say, well, that's nothing compared to, well, it's all your frame of reference. It's all your past experience and what you're equipped to handle or not equipped to handle. And we develop our ability to handle things by going through them. So I think it's really important that we not fall prey to comparing our reality to somebody else's fragment of somebody else's reality and think that we don't measure up.
Okay. And, I take that point to heart, because comparison kills a lot of initiative before it gets outside the mind, because people are fearful, particularly in our 45 plus. We've had jobs, we've had success, and the sense of risk probably in most people has gone down. They've got an identity, and honestly, our adult ego is a lot stronger than our childhood ego. If we can be told to correct something as a kid, we often do it, and away we go. Adults, we just don't tend to respond that quickly. My thought or question to you is in terms of context, I do something called the power of the posse, the people that you hang with, helping provide that frame of reference that you alluded to. Can you talk about, your personal experience, through your life? Have there been guiding forces? You mentioned your parents already, that have helped you create this absolutely incredible perspective on life.
Oh, so many. Yeah. So faith and family first and foremost. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. The power of peers. I love the power of posse. That's great. It is so important, because we were talking about this yesterday, actually, at our 2 days ago at our CAPS meeting, our Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, we're both a member of. The power of peers to both push you when you're doubting yourself that you can, and also provide a safe place to fall and a place to retreat to when you feel like you've suffered a defeat, is essential. I don't know how people succeed without that. And so if you're trying to be the lone wolf and do it all on your own, I would encourage you not to. And if you have the impression that those people that you admire are doing it alone, I think that that's probably incorrect. Mm-hmm. That it's incredibly important to have people to seek wisdom from, for people to give you a different perspective, because when we're in the middle of any situation, we have a very limited perspective on what's going on. It's clouded by what we are not able to see. It's clouded by our past experience. It's clouded by our internal biases, and so oftentimes all it takes, that's the power of coaching, right? All it takes is somebody without skin in the game and an outside perspective to give you a different way of looking at something. Sometimes that's all it takes to solve problems. So absolutely, you need to be plugging into peers, and I recommend people that who are at least heading the same direction you want to be heading, right? the tendency some people have is to surround themselves with people that are easy to get along with, but not necessarily aspiring to the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you can also feel like you're still alone in the sense that I'm the only one in this group who seems to want to do anything with my life.
I know.
So
we constantly talk about, if you're getting together with your friends and all they're talking about is the complaints about the political system or something like that, and there's nothing growth oriented, then, that could give you pause for thought. But here's an avatar personality. Let's say you've been in that career, that 20, 30-year career. There's something bigger inside of you, but your career, you've accepted your career. It's in a support position. It's not inspiring. You've just put in your time. You don't have the peers at work. You don't have them outside your work because you've never been in that environment. So what you're really trying to do is break out of a shell that you've crafted for yourself for 2 or 3 decades and meet new people that are those inspiring people, supportive people that you had alluded to. How does one go about cracking into a network like that, creating a network like that?
Yeah, very good question. I think, this is where positive elements of social media can be very helpful. It's certainly got lots of downsides, but the ability to literally plug into any social circle in the world is at your fingertips at this point, right? So things like Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, where you really, and if you're intimidated, and many people might be in that context where this is new, that's a really easy place to kind of go and just be a passive observer and see if this is the place for you and see if you resonate with these people. And plug in and comment or speak up here and there when you feel comfortable, but not feel super intimidated. To me, it's a lot less intimidating, for example, than walking into a physical space with 20 strangers that you don't know. But certainly that's another avenue, right? Service clubs, for example, or faith groups, or other groups, other leadership groups in your community are also really good places to and the barrier to entry is not big. It's not like the requirements are crazy, or that, the average Joe can go in and do that. It's going to be uncomfortable, right? It's because anything new is. Yeah. And so then it becomes a question of how bad do you want to do this, right? Is it worth it or not? But you can broaden your horizons in really powerful ways by, as you said, associating with different people. And, some professional development folks, experts, whatever you want to call them, will say, if you've got people in your life that are not supporting where you want to go, then you need to cut them out of your life. And I think that's pretty harsh and unrealistic, because if those people happen to be your parents or your siblings or people you care about, then that's probably not going to happen.
No, they're not easy to swap out.
So, right. And so then it just becomes a question of, okay, well, I can love these people and even spend time with these people, but they're not the people I'm going to seek for guidance on life decisions or career decisions, probably, right? I'm going to love them where they're at, and I'm going to enjoy my barbecue with them. But when it comes time to think about what I want to do with my life, I'm probably not going to seek their wisdom. I think you can probably do both.
Yeah. And I guess, your thoughts on, I always talk about, I do talk about culling, promoting, and demoting your posse members depending on your life circumstance. And I softly tap shoe like a good politician around the idea of family and, lifelong friends, because those are not ones that you necessarily do. But, if you're spending 5-6 hours with somebody in a week and it's not serving your greater purpose, you're spending an hour or two a week, and just alter the proportions. You are a family man. You met the love of your life. And I'm interested in some of your words around legacy and role modeling, and that you are doing for your children and others, and myself included. I'm not doing that in a comparative way, but you're an inspiration that way. A lot of people in our passion pivots, like I said, can be in their 50s and 60s. So they've switched from pure dollars, earning, and personal ego to actually trying to have role model behavior for those that they're close to. Tell me about your situation and family, and how your kids, tell us a little bit about them, and how they perceive, dad and mom and all those good things.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest task, biggest challenge, most important work that I'll ever do is to try and be a dad that empowers so we have kids. Our daughter Emma is 10, and Mateo is 7, and then our little Caleb is a year and a half. And my wife, Maryse, is a superhero. I use that term very accurately because, Scott, the work that we do, I travel a fair bit. I work hard when I work. I try really hard to be fully present and at home when I'm home, but I don't always succeed at that. And she makes it all happen and works a full-time job on top of that, I might add. So there's no way I do what I do without that support. And you're right. It's legacy. It's interesting. And when you told me about your audience and the show, I thought I can relate to these people, even though I may be 15, 20 years their junior, because in terms of life expectancy, we're probably in the same place. And I may be even further along that road. I don't know. It depends on a lot of factors. But, my life expectancy, I'm already past what I was supposed to do in terms of survival. So I'm in that same mindset, I think, of what do I want my life to be about and what do I want to leave behind? And so, I work really hard at giving my kids the tools they're going to need to succeed. I think my wife and I do our best to work off each other and be a good balance for each other in terms of I tend to be the one that is maybe a little harder on them. And she tends to be the one who's a little more nurturing. And I think between the two of us, we created a pretty good balance for them that way. And, obviously I think we all want the same things for our kids. We want to see them lead some, fulfilling lives that make a positive difference to them and to the people around them. And they're all still too young to see where their lives are going to head, but it's fun to watch them grow and to see how incredibly individual three human beings raised by two people in the same house are already diverging in completely different directions, which is kind of fun to watch.
It's you said it so powerfully that that you may be paralleling our audience here, and the way you phrase that in terms of remaining life expectancy. So there's that sense of we take care of ourselves and our family, and there tends to be a thing of wanting to contribute to other communities, and it's no longer just about me. I'm not just earning it for the paycheck. I just don't have that time, or my time in that arena is done. Tell me some of your passions in terms of giving to. I know you speak to youth, and you've mentioned faith before, but where are some of the areas that Mark is making a concerted effort to contribute beyond self, and not necessarily for monetary gain?
Sure. So I mean, the first one really is my work, and I say that because sure I happen to get. I'm in the fortunate position to happen to get paid for what I would do for free. And I'm really about trying to help as many people as possible live the best version of their life, because we only get to do this thing one time. And so that's certainly part of it. One of my other big passions is organ and tissue donation awareness, for very obvious reasons. I'm alive today because another family in the most difficult moment in their life made the most selfless decision they could make in that moment and thought of other people instead of themselves and gave their loved ones' organs to other people. And when somebody does that, dozens and dozens of lives can be affected. So increasing awareness around that is something that I work at on a volunteer basis constantly. And then we have a local, I don't even think they'd like to call themselves a shelter, but a local facility that is working to eliminate poverty and homelessness in Moncton, New Brunswick, which is still a pretty big task, unfortunately, and yet I think a very achievable task. We live in a nation that I don't think anybody should have to be living in a street in a place where we are so fortunate to be so wealthy. So those are some of the things that I work on in my spare time.
Which I imagine are microseconds at best at times.
Well, for all of us, right? Nobody that is not busy, but yes, it's challenging.
Well, for somebody who's driven by passion in life, and that from our discussion and knowing you is obviously how you are propelled forward. Mark, if somebody wanted to understand what your message is that you're speaking on, are there elements that we haven't covered that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest, this is where my work is heading in the next few years, I think. as opposed to where it's been. It's very much been about, let's overcome adversity and achieve goals, and all of that is good and great, and keep doing that. But where it's heading for me is, how can we shorten the gap between the moment that we face adversity and get really frustrated, because I think we all do that. We have at least that moment of, it's either fear, frustration, anger, or a mix of all of those things, where we just go, this isn't fair, I don't like this, and eventually we get to a place of acceptance so that we can then do something about it. And there's a gap there. And for some of us, that gap is, and in some situations, that gap is an hour, or it's 10 minutes, and other times, in other situations, and other people, that gap is 10 years. And so how can we, in any given situation, shorten that gap as much as possible so that we can not waste our two most finite resources, time and energy, on things that we can't do anything about? And so on a very practical day-to-day basis, that means things like not allowing bad weather and traffic to bother you anymore, all the way up to, the cancer diagnosis, or losing a loved one, or how can we process those in the most healthy, constructive ways so that they fuel us going forward, not denying that they happened, or skipping over grieving, or any of those things, but how can we get to a place where we use those in constructive ways sooner rather than later?
That's absolutely incredible. I'm sitting here taking notes as you are speaking here, because that's exactly it. We don't want people to be defined by the adversity that life has thrown at them. And I was going to summarize, but you just did. So nothing short. You're an amazing man. Mark, if folks wanted to reach out and connect with you, what are some of the best ways to do that?
Certainly you can reach me, all the Facebook and all the social media channels. It's Mark Black Speaks. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to. mark@markblack.ca. I'm typically too prompt in getting back to people by email. I need to discipline myself to not be so attached to my phone and doing that. And if people would like, I wrote a book a few years ago that I now just give away to people. So if you go to markblack.ca/freebook, you can download it in PDF, and I hope people will do that and enjoy that as well.
That's a very generous gift. I appreciate that. One final question for you. You talked earlier about the power and the importance of a vision going forward to propel you. Life 5 years out for you now, if you can do that. And if you can't, that's okay. But what would you see as a best case scenario for you?
Sure. Well, so I'm on a mission to reach 1 million people. I don't know that we'll be there yet 5 years from now, but we'll certainly be more than half of the way there. And then most importantly, my wife is healthy and fulfilled, and my 3 kids are healthy and heading in the directions of their passion and their purpose. And my work is providing us with the financial means to make sure that happens, and we're contributing to the lives of the people around us. It's just heading down the same road we're on, hopefully. Okay. But who knows, because life throws you curveballs, right?
Well, if your history is any judge or predictor of your future behavior, you're more than ready to take care of that. Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It has truly been a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, likewise, Scott. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for what you're doing for people. I meet a lot of folks in this demographic and in the work that I do, and too many of them are living. I think it's a Thoreau line: living lives of quiet desperation. So the work you're doing here is really, really important. So keep at it. Thank you.
Much appreciated, and I know our paths will cross again soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day, sir.
You too.
Cheers.